A good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. My name is Raymond Mujini, the show that critiques the news media and the story angles they've taken throughout the week. The biggest story, of course, coming out of this week was the closure or shutdown of the Democratic Governance Facility. And the second biggest story, of course, is the filing of the Supreme Court petition challenging the presidential results. We'll be able to discuss at least both of them, but majorly the Democratic Governance Facility and its shutdown. And of course, to discuss this, we have the most seasoned journalists on the panel, some of them now working with CSOs, starting with you, Jackie Kemilisa. Thank you so much for coming back again. You've worked for civil society and also are a journalist. Dismas, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you very much.
From civil society, former journalist too. And then Elias Samchibi, who's an editor. I think with the way things are going, the way things are going, you'll be in civil society. Yeah, but I want to start with you, Eliasa, just to help us provide context. What is this DGF story? What's behind the DGF story? What has led to the closure of Uganda's biggest fund?
Oh, you surprised me there, because after introducing these distinguished people who actually are in the civil society sector, I thought they would be the ones to...
They are biased.
Yeah,
but you are the editor who is running the story.
Yes, they are biased and whatever. And, I don't know, because I think the reason they will be shut down is because they have the dollars. It has appeared to us that the government has been running against dollars. Whichever dollars that come in and don't go straight in the government's purse have caused a lot of discomfort recently. I don't know how many times the president has said that there are some people elsewhere, especially in the West, who are trying to subvert government. And I think the subversion that he would be talking about is the money. A number of people, I think from around August, September, there have been a lot of complaints. I think there's been a build-up. You'd hear some people maybe connected to civil society or whatever, they get a few, maybe some significant amounts of money, dollars in their accounts, and they tell you, my account was frozen. I just cannot access it. And a number of organizations have suffered it. I learned this week that even the Nabagika Foundation had their accounts frozen for some time, and they had to do some lobbying for it to be reopened. So if you are just talking about DGF, because who does DGF fund? I think maybe the most vocal people operating in this country, and what most of them say does not seem to please the powers that be. And that is a serious matter now, because we may just say that the election is behind us, but we are at a time where I think since 2011, every post-election has been very problematic. And it's like now you go, even if you may not encounter so many soldiers, so many people in security are on alert class 1. They fear that the population are going to rise up. And that has been so for at least a decade now. So there is that big problem, and therefore I think it is very important to control the narrative. And so you'll hear so many people speaking from both sides of their mouth many times. This has happened, no, and now the narrative, I think that I noticed it in 2016 after the election. It is here now. They say, okay, there have been a few problems, but can we now move forward? The election is behind us, we need to move forward. Whatever stuff. Whatever irregularities were there, we are going to deal with them. Uganda is still here in the years that will come. And I think some of the people who are likely to try and challenge that narrative may just be those who benefit from the funding from DGF and other issues. I mean, there are going to be maybe a number of other factors, But I think it is very, very important to manage the politics. And the politics right now, it is very difficult, I think, to be a government spokesperson at any level.
It has never been easy to be a government spokesperson.
Yeah, I think it is extremely
increasingly
difficult now.
Yeah.
So
Dismas, from reading the letter that the president presented to the Minister of Finance, which leaked to the media, almost no media house believes that the president shut down DGF because he didn't have a Ugandan representative on the board. Almost no media house. All the media houses have written stories linking the closure of DGF to post-election violence, or likely post-election violence. Is someone missing the story, or that's the actual story?
I think, I tend to believe that possibly someone is missing the story. I do believe that the president has done so many things in the past, but this knee-jerk reaction in particular about DGF. DGF has been here since 2011. It's not the first time that they are bringing in funds into the country. So if you wait for 10 years for you to be able to understand that a certain amount of fund, I don't want to believe that the intelligence couldn't know that over all this time, that this amount of money that DGF always brings in every year, that he has been bringing it for the last 10 years. And then all of a sudden you wake up. I think the thing is, it's a connection to the politics, like Elias was saying. It's about the fear. Who receives that money? And in particular, when you look at the work that DGF is doing civic literacy, is doing freedom of expression, is doing things that help the country to have democratic credentials. So all of a sudden, when you finish election, you say, oh, this might be a problem. I need to be able to arrest and put it into control because the governance structure of DGF all of a sudden appears now that there's no Ugandan on it. It means that someone who has been collecting information, intelligence, and maybe that person needs to have been a little bit more intelligent on how that story is told, other than just bungling something that is going to fall back into their faces.
Particularly on the amounts of money that DGF is bringing in. DGF has refused to release a statement, but for a fact, majority of DGF's funding actually goes to government, the judiciary, and in the agencies inside the president's office.
Many.
Is it because that DGF doesn't want to get into a war of words with the president in the media?
But if you're DGF, you'd say, what wrong have I done? Do I have to go and is it a court of law? Am I going to challenge the president on facts which, when I know that the things that I've been doing over all this time, there have been approvals for the things. Even those ministers of finance themselves, they have had money from DGF. So to the extent that if your government, there's ministers, I have seen that the judiciary is there, I see the Auditor General's office is there, I've seen Ministry, Makerere University is there. So like there's so many government institutions. Is it bad that the government institutions have been receiving this money for doing something that is good, but all of a sudden simply because maybe it has, the money has a resonance on the future, like Arias is saying, that people are scared. Is there going to be a revolution? You can remember the things that happened around when they closed MTN. It was around the same things of saying, who's giving money to, who is connecting who to. So there is total paranoia of people who collect intelligence, but whether they're intelligent enough to tell the right story is what is the problem.
Jack, if I could bring you in. 4 years ago, this story starts with closure of Action 8. Their accounts were closed. The farm that got Bahrain was closed. The accounts, yes, the accounts also taken. Then it was the Uganda Police Force under Kale Kaihura. And increasingly, it became okay to shut down NGOs. In the last year alone, I think 35 different NGOs have complained that their accounts were closed by the state without explanation. Now, the biggest funder in the game is being shut down. Is it systemic? Is it something that the state and NGOs are now at war with each other?
I don't know if I would call it systemic per se, but I think that there's been a clear record and precedent that the government has set. But at the same time, if you're looking at, say, the legislation, the controversial NGO Act, when it was on the floor of Parliament, and then the late Aronda, I think, was the one who was in charge. And one complaint that kept coming up from civil society was the fact that if NGOs, as they are termed, perform developmental roles, shouldn't they then be under a ministry, or shouldn't the NGO board be under a ministry that does developmental work? Why is that particular ministry being Ministry of Internal Affairs? So the security aspect, and I think that, as the co-panelists have also talked about, has been very, very key. Now, the normalization when it comes to the financial intelligence, people together with government and closing NGOs as and when they wish, without really any explanations. So for example, we're now debating whether or not was DGF actually shut down, or was the president proposing that it be shut down? And what has actually happened after that? And also just on the media aspect is questioning what powers does the president have legally to shut down an NGO? So then we start with just simply interrogating these things that we've sort of gotten accustomed to and run by as mere facts. So for example, what is that procedure like? Okay, so if the president writes to finance, that letter is leaked to the media, but what is the procedure of actually closing an NGO? So I think that we've maybe part of the things that we've played in as media is just the normalization of these things that are not normal. So if we are talking about, so for example, if you go back to the NGO boom, and that is about 1989, coinciding with the NGO Act, but the NGOs go back in Ugandan history as far back as the early 50s and 60s. So I think that I see two parallels running together. One, which is that the government deciding to shut down NGOs runs parallel to where our democracy is as a country. The second one is that the issue of funding and the issue where the money is coming from versus the work that NGOs are doing, if you look critically at the sectors that NGOs are in, education, health. So for example, the health budget, at least as of 2013, was 40% funded by church-leaning organizations. So you find that in these areas where NGOs have predominantly gotten into is because there's been a deliberate retreat by the state. So you have limited resources that are coming into these spaces by the state, and then you have an NGO boom who's of course part of the neoliberal agenda. So I think that the two parallels of who has more power, who has more security versus the negligence of government in certain areas run co and co. And when those two then meet, that's when we have this back and forth where we're actually not sure what exactly is happening. So if the president writes saying shut down, then what happens? Like I'm more curious about that particular process. But I also think that this is something that from the passing of the controversial NGO Act, I think that was in 2016 or 15, the bill was 2015, I think, to what has happened now to many NGOs being shut, or their finances being, frozen without clear explanation in terms of what has happened. I think that that's a precedent that the Museveni government has actually set.
Eliasa, if I could bring you in here, on the regulation of NGOs, there's an NGO board which does the regulation. The letter of the president didn't even mention it among the agencies that should investigate. The president talked about the IGG, he sent Nakalema after DGF, and he sent the Uganda Police Force after DGF. Nowhere did he mention the one entity that is in charge of NGOs and making sure that their finances are together and in check. Could it be that the president is playing a carrot and stick game, knowing that these agencies under DGF belong mostly to EU countries that have already expressed their dissatisfaction with the result?
Because I think one thing we need to be sure about is whether DGF is an NGO, let's say, like any other we'd be talking about. Because this is a fund that into which many EU countries put their resources to channel them here. And I don't know, would that be the NGO Bureau? I suspect seriously whether it should be the Minister of Finance. I don't know why, let's say, the Minister of Internal Affairs wouldn't get interested. But I think it all goes into the confusion that she has been elaborating, that there are a lot of gray areas to be, I think, discussed. And why we are talking about it now, is because it comes, the president wrote, I think, before the election actually. It comes at a time when we are talking politics, so it is certainly supposed to be tied into the politics that's going on. And again, there are so many things to be read together with it. One of them that we haven't talked about is before this, the attack on the finances of many CSOs and NGOs, there were physical attacks, many of them being broken into, and they say computers have been taken, and that went on for a while. Dozens of organizations suffered from that, and I think some newspapers, media houses, The Observer being one of them. So that came and went. So now we talk about it because we are talking politics. And one other case I want to talk about connected to that, where the NGO Bureau was directly involved, was looking at correspondences between them and an NGO called Give Directly. Give Directly,
the US NGO.
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah, they actually do operate here.
Yeah.
And I was looking at what they had been doing. In the US alone, for instance, they had given $100 million to people who are in need. So they come here and I think they had $17.5 million to give to people who they thought during lockdown was seriously affected. And the government had given them directions that people who live in urban areas, particularly in low-income neighborhoods, are in serious trouble because they live hand-to-mouth and they are not working. So these people had targeted at just over 200,000 households to give them 100,000 shillings per month for a period of 3 months. And in one of the letters I saw one ridiculous reason, which the NGO Bureau give directly, that you see, if you give these people money, they are going to become lazy. So they won't be working, now they'll be used to handouts. But the government itself had been giving people food. It was a poorly done job, and many people who actually badly needed food didn't get it. And the government didn't fear actually that would make people lazy, because you can't make people lazy when they are already redundant in their homes and they badly need to survive. So, and that, by the way, it was a cabinet decision to suspend the
Give Direct.
To suspend those remittances to the people who had been identified up to a certain date in January, when they said they would review, cabinet would sit and review the decision. But that again goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's about the dollars, and this is money that is going directly to people. I don't know what the calculations were, and so it was to go to people, let's say in Kampala, in Lira, in Gulu, in towns and cities where they thought people did not have gardens, and that was so. It is all muddled up. It is difficult to understand exactly what it is about, but again, I'd just insist on one thing I was saying earlier, that it has to do with, because you are talking about DGF giving money to government departments and ministries and whatever, and agencies, that doesn't seem to be enough for the powers that be. If foreign countries have money to give to Ugandans, let them channel it through budget support. Let the government get the money, and then they can decide what is good for us and whatever. If you are thinking about jealous, that is a very big sector that the European Union is interested in. It may not be what is immediately important here, and I think there is some friction there. So the argument may not actually make a lot of sense to the people in power, that you're talking about money being channeled, let's say, to government departments, ministries and agencies. We want it if you think it is for Uganda and whatever. And the last, on that one, I was watching NTV here, and Ofono Pondo, the ED of the Government Media Center, I think he gave all the reasons in a very short statement. where he said, and he was accusing, he was wondering where NUP, a party that was only 3 years old, would get money to sponsor candidates, pay 3 million shillings per person for nomination, and maybe hundreds to run their campaigns when they were very young and whatever. And the direct insinuation he made was that such funds could just have found their way into politics.
Dismas, let's discuss the international relations angle of this story. There's been visible fighting within the state on its tilt to the east. Uganda is increasingly borrowing from China against borrowing from the West, where it traditionally got the money from. And there hasn't been any complaint from the West about Uganda's borrowing, except saying that the borrowing might exceed what Uganda is able to pay back. But definitely, the insinuation of the rise of dissatisfaction against Museveni's regime, currently, Museveni says this is caused by foreign powers. He says his opposition against him is funded by the foreign powers. And he's refused to mention these foreign powers, but he at least refers to them as the West. Never does he refer to them as the East. Is this also an international relations story playing out right before our eyes?
You know, Museveni, I know that sometimes people take advantage of him and they can do things which are not necessary, but for him to cultivate and start writing a letter down and writing to Kaseija and saying that DGF should be investigated or should be looked into for the affairs that it's conducting in this country, well aware, certainly he knows that this is Austria, Denmark, you know, all those countries, for even the European Union, and he knows his image on what the European Union means. But like Ilya is saying, I think that the thing that has caught Museveni unawares is the point of not knowing who exactly benefits from that money, from the DGF money. It doesn't matter whether the government, but you know, the number of beneficiaries that were listed, there were about 70. So government, I didn't pick out the government's one and put them on the side. But what you could see is that there are certain, and I know many of them, who receive, and they do good work. Those ones action aid, you know, INET. There's so many. You look at NGOs. INET works in northern Uganda, in Lera. Its work is basically to help survivors of war to be able to live in harmony. Then you look at others, you know, ACME, the Africa Center for Media Excellence. So just basically working on issues to do with media, a freedom of expression, and conducting and knowing that there is freedom of expression and the media is free in the country. So whether the politics, if the borrowing that we have, that we do from China, of course there are reasons why we go to China for our loans. Maybe the restrictions are less, maybe the interrogations of why you need the loan, or even the payback may not be the same as if we are going, for example, the strict people of Washington and London. So that is there. But the most important thing that for me I've seen all through this, it is only one thing. I think the president was scared. He couldn't understand what Elias told you, how a certain party, political party, and Raymond, you know it, we discussed it on Hot Seat, that this political party may not even get 1% or even manage one MP into parliament. But all of a sudden, you draw the map of Uganda and look all around Lake Victoria. It's all red, this color. So you wonder and say, so he must be wondering and saying, if this trend of certain funding that comes in, we have no control over, what else would it go to? Same thing that he mentioned about, would it be able to raise enough money that is required to people to raise up against our government, as people have said, is Plan B, which fortunately Chaguranyi said he doesn't know anything about Plan B. So I think it's that fear, the fear of politics, and it happens all the time. All the time Museveni is faced with the politics of unknown, and he feels that he's actually the target. He acts in a certain panic manner. And there is no difference between that and what has happened to this DGF.
Jackie, is this an international relations story too? Is it Museveni struggling between the East and the West after winning victory?
I think yes and no. I think that maybe there's a tendency to focus outward versus focusing inward in terms of Museveni's struggles are within. The people who who were anti-NRM in this particular election were anti-NRM because they had a Ugandan political candidate that they supported. Now, whether it is that the ongoing brewing Cold War between the West and China that is then playing out in Uganda, we've seen that over time in terms of media around China's investments versus the West. What I, however, think is that NGOs operate, from what I think, from a very neoliberal agenda, and I think both China and the West all come with their own neoliberalism in terms of needing that government follows certain structures by withdrawing finances from certain, and making like markets free and open. So whether it's a public relations story, I think that it's a public relations story in terms of finances. It's a domestic stories in terms of the effects. So if DGF is shut down, that means money that goes both to private sectors and government sectors and organization is cut off. Now, what does that mean for the ordinary Ugandan? It may be a war of language between the EU and Museveni and China, but it has like direct implications on the ordinary Ugandan. And not to say that all NGOs play some virtual role, but I think that the role that the NGO boom has played has been largely the middlewoman, the arbitrator, the one who comes in. It's like a buffer between the empire and, it has created that role, and we've seen how NGOs have played the role including the ones who are directly affected by the DGF fund. What sectors are they in? They're in policy, they're in government, they are, to a large extent, in health and in education. So I think that the role that the NGO has over time played has been altering the public psyche in a way that they are feeling sectors and they're feeling needs that should directly be the government should meet, but the government is not meeting. So they play this buffer between the angry citizen and the government. So what then happens when that buffer is removed? I think that is what is interesting to me domestically. But internationally, I don't think that the China versus the West narrative is about to end. We've seen that play out in technology. We've seen that play out with former President Trump's ban on certain Chinese telecom, but certain technology as well. But also we've seen the increasing role that the Chinese government has actually played in this election, whether it is through the technology. We saw that 2017 story of the Huawei technicians helping government hack
into Bobby Wine's phone.
Into Bobby Wine's phone. So, but we also saw directly when the other agencies, neoliberal agencies, were saying a free and fair election, China issued a statement and said, as big superpowers, quote unquote, we should stay out of this. So there's a very direct, what can I say, redistribution. I don't think that's the right word. Redrawing. What was that in history? The petition and strong petition of Africa.
Petition.
Exactly.
The scrum one petition.
Yeah, the scrum one petition of Africa, but this time it's around the West versus China. But who gets the direct effects? That's actually the Ugandans.
All right, we're going to take a very short break, but when we come back, we wind up the DGF story and talk about the Ugandan election petition. Thank you so much for staying with the Fourth Estate. Now let's wind down the DGF story. Eliasa, I know you're going to be covering this story for a long time. The comments of the Minister Kasaija, of course, have made the story a little bit more murkier. Moving forward, how does the press confront this story, which is seemingly being played out at powerful levels that many or very few journalists have access to in terms of sources.
Yeah, you say we have very limited access, and then you want me to explain.
Yes, but I mean, you are preparing a newspaper, so definitely
you have
there's a way you're going to get this.
Yeah, basically, we report it as it develops. That is important. But also, I wanted to make one quick observation about the same. That you see, DGF is just $100, is it? 100 million euros? Yeah, million euros or something. That's for each period, a year or?
I think it's a year.
Or 3 years and stuff. If you look at that and compare, for instance, the government of Uganda has borrowed at least $1.5 billion since March last year when COVID came. I think $600 million of it, of that came from one fund, that is IMF, 500 million from another, and we are talking about the West now. So the issue is the government has going to continue to receive a lot of money from the West, and I don't think that is about to stop. So whatever happens, I think now the quarrel is about how the money is channeled, not whether the money should come from the West. And I think even President Museveni is looking to remain extremely relevant to the West. He'll be willing to do their bidding, whether it's in Somalia or it is in the geopolitics around and whatever. And I think that is important for his political survival, and he'll continue to do it. And because of that, it is very likely that the DGF story may, we might just have an anticlimax. If you listened to the Minister of Finance and you are just referring to what he was saying, that may just be one way of now starting to move from the precipice. And a few weeks or maybe days from now, you hear that, you see, now the issues have been resolved, we have a representative on the board, and we move forward. I mean, that wouldn't surprise me a lot.
Yeah.
Where does this story go?
I don't think that this story has had a background, like Elias has said. It's not the first time, like I said, they get agitated about certain amounts of money which they have no control over. And the story of DGF fortunately is backed up. It's not you, Raymond, having your NGO and all of a sudden in the morning they come and shut it and tell you your accounts are frozen. You don't do that to DGF. DGF is a big funder. DGF has names behind it. So they're going to find the compromise. And simply put, the way in which Minister Kaseja has said, it's an easier route out of the quagmire. It's an easier way of saying, okay, we have started the plan. It was misinformed.
Oh,
the intelligence was not good, and but of course they don't want the president to look bad. So they will say there are some elements who confuse the president about this issue, and DGF can run its affairs. We'll look into the issues of whether we can have a Ugandan on the board, and I don't think that the EU or the countries that contribute to DGF would be more concerned about, or even concerned about having a Ugandan on the board. So it will end. It is going to end, but it is at climax, and hopefully it teaches a lesson that some people need to be able to do their homework before they start sputtering anything.
But away from just the DGF story ending, the story of the Ugandan civil society and the Ugandan state, where does it go? I mean, you still have Nicholas Opio on trial.
It is.
You still have accounts blocked. So where does that go?
It is very difficult, Raymond. It's actually, if you look at the number of civil society leaders in Uganda whose accounts are closed, it doesn't make you are almost, a person is earning genuinely, he has a salary. The person pays, the organization pays salaries, pay as you earn. They do their NSSF. They do all the financial obligations required of them. But all of a sudden you wake up and say that, you know what, Raymond, you are too influential, your accounts are frozen. What if you did it to every other person who is influential and is doing things that you don't believe in? Then you would be closing the entire country. So civil society organizations are going to be crippled. I think it's my young sister here was saying that, that the role of civil society used to be fill certain areas. A civil society organization does not develop where the government is competent. they develop where the government is incompetent so that they can help it to fix things that it should have done by itself.
Yeah.
So in this country, Ghana, the moment you start shutting NGOs, you are literally saying that this space in which we need other actors to help us develop the country, develop systems, civic education, do, you know, the basic thing that the government doesn't have a role to do. And then when you kill that space, thank you. The democratic credentials of the country are up there for discussion.
Jackie, where does this story go? How does it end?
I think that where the story goes should, for me, I was thinking about it in terms of where media should focus. And I think that media should focus more on interrogating the question around powers, especially the seemingly oversweeping powers, but also the fact that the president has over time deliberately, or I don't know the other word for that, crippled institutions to make sure that line, the accountability line, is blurred. So now we are having these conversations around gray areas when there's actually like legislation in place that we should be able to follow when it comes to certain things. But I also think that what this particular story has done is to, for example, expose just how, for example, mass movements have been NGOized. You know, that the people who would be on the forefront, you know, demanding for certain things now can earn a salary while doing those certain things. So then what happens when that well-mannered revolution is taken away and then people are pushed, you know, to the back? That means people need to push back. So I think for me this particular story would be interesting for media to explore those the role, for example, that we can't divorce neoliberalism, we can't divorce the Western agenda, we can't divorce the fact that NGO money does dictate certain agendas for development, for certain things. But at the same time, we also can't divorce the fact that the government has in turn also used NGOs to simply stay away from its roles. And the lastly is that the politicization, which I think is a good thing in my way of thinking, is that the politicization of NGOs, because NGOs actually do play a political role, whether it's a political role in bringing education near to the people, whether it is a political role in educating the people, whether it is civic education. And I think that when we start to interrogate what exactly those roles are, then maybe Ugandans will start indirectly or directly demanding certain things from their government, instead of saying that, well, there's an NGO, so you can, you know, get a 9 to 8 well salaried job.
the incompetence of government again coming up very prominently. Eliasa, let's just switch gears to the second biggest story this week, the Supreme Court petition. It had been long awaited, the challenge to Museveni's victory coming through a court system. Robert Chagulanyi has filed a Supreme Court petition saying the election was carried out illegally by the Electoral Commission. Many irregularities have been cited in the way that the election was carried out, and he's asking that the incumbent Yoweri Kaguta Museveni the declaration be announced. Before I even ask you what his chances of success are, how did the Daily Monitor receive this story? How different did this story feel? Because you've covered 4 petitions down the road now.
Did it feel different? I'm not sure, because it looked like it was always coming. Of course, there were all those conversations as to whether there should be a petition or not within the wider opposition, in the media and all over. And many people make predictions about how such petitions would go, and many players say it wouldn't make sense for us. So the thing about how we received it is we knew we have seen such petitions before, so we just read, and people kept saying it is being prepared. The only surprise is how quickly Chagulanyi was allowed to get out of his house. Maybe there was some doubt as to whether he would be allowed out to file the petition. Of course, many people will think the petition then helps cool off the tempers and everything, and if you have gone to court and challenged an election which you say was conducted illegally, or whatever word you may use, and then you bind yourself to whatever decision the court may hand down. And I think that is something that I have seen even people who speak for the government are happy about it. They say it's a civilized thing. But you know, I wouldn't want to even discuss the petition or whatever. I don't know whether even the rule of sub judice does apply to it, to things like that. But for me, the most important thing is about that precipice, which we've been for a decade or so, that I talked about earlier, because the petition comes against a certain background. And that background has been, for 3 consecutive elections, the post-election is very difficult. In 2011, the country erupted and walked to work. But it was after the election, it looked like the president has won 68%. Kizza Besigye has been crushed, everything, and we move forward. And then it was very difficult for anyone to anticipate that, as it happened on April the 1st, as it were, when those things were announced, and everyone was talking about that and whatever, then it looked like it would happen again in 2016. And that is, 2016 is when I first saw the military come out in full force. I think they were SFC soldiers. The day Kizza Besigye escaped from house arrest and went down to downtown Kampala, and guys did not mind cracking people's heads, even people who were not even bothered about what was going on, and they were just caught up in the melee. They had been moving. They did not know the man would come to town. He came hoping maybe they would rise up. So that issue, the problem has been, and I think it is the big question I wanted to arrive at is transition from Museveni's presidency, because that is what it has always been. People go into the election and they are very clear that we will not accept the results because we don't expect a free and fair election. So they go into the election and they are not shy to say it, that this election, we just use it as a process to mobilize. So the government counter-mobilizes. And now the police and the military, their biggest preoccupation for a decade has been to prevent the president from being overthrown by his own people. In many cases, that's why they have occupied all the public spaces. They have, and they are, wherever they are on alert class 1, waiting to see what happens. They are monitoring and whatever and stuff. So the petition comes, two things. The minister, for instance, the junior minister of education, John Chrysostom Muyingo, made an important statement recently that he didn't have a problem with his people of Bamnanika. They would have voted him back, but they only punished him for kujikwatako. They told him not to remove the age limit, and he went against their word. I think he was very candid about it. So they punished him. The man who introduced the age limit bill, Raphael Majezi, even feared to go back and look at the voters. In the lead up to that vote in Parliament, Afrobarometer, they did a poll and they showed that over 2/3 of Ugandans didn't want the age limit removed. In effect, they did not want President Museveni to run again. So the election was about, now it involved a candidate who 2/3 of Ugandans did not want to run again. So there is that very big issue of transition, and I think we cannot be discussing elections or now the petition that will happen, because that ties everyone, whether it is the judges, it is whoever and stuff, and it is to be seen through that prism, in my opinion.
Dismas, I spoke to Kizza Besigye this week, and he was very candid in saying, I will never go back and subject myself to a court process. Yes. And he said the reason isn't that the judges are even biased. It's that on 2 occasions he's proven that the election was conducted against the law. He's proven that irregularities happened in the elections, but he's always shocked that despite all this proof that he brings to the courtroom, and the court admits this proof and says, yes, this is true, they don't overturn the result. So he said there is no need to actually seek a duel between the Supreme Court and the president to overturn the outcome of results. Are chances any different for Robert Kyagulanyi? Are the chances any different for Robert Kyagulanyi?
I watched that interview, Raymond, you did with Dr. Besigye. The thing about it is this. The processes of the Uganda of petitioning court and being able to get a hearing, a very sober hearing from these very qualified justices of the court, and whether there is a decision that is done for them. Someone the other day was joking and said, that isn't it possible you, the current Supreme Court judges, you can just get the decision of 2016,
2001 in fact.
Edit the dates, only the dates and the subject, or remove Kizza Besigye, put Kyagulanyi as the petition, and then it will be good and dry. So in other words, people know, it's civic in nature, like you said, that you want to seek the court, and the court, then it becomes a trial of the court of Uganda, of the Supreme Court, against the people of Uganda, against the population of Uganda who are saying, oh, so it's the same thing that you are doing over a period of time. That's why you find that whenever they are appointing judges of the Supreme Court, everybody is scrutinizing, they are looking at the names. Can this one ever have any chance of doing something that is is opposed to the ruling, to the government in power? No. So it's the same thing, and I agree with Dr. Kizza Besigye. I don't think that it's a wastage of time. I think there is a time actually. I think there is one petition where he actually nearly got it. The one which
2006.
2006. The one which had the Justice Sekoko, Odell, Mulenga, and we know the politics of exactly what happened because the decision had already been made. It had to be remade again to change the status quo they had taken, because at that time I think they had agreed that the election has to be annulled. So it's the same script, it's the same actors that are going there. Whether it's Kyagulanyi because of changing from FDC to someone becoming NUP, no. And in particular, given the anger that NUP has generated in terms of the political processes in this country, and in particular for NRM, politically, I didn't say judiciary, I said politically, it won't happen.
Jackie, looking at this petition, there's nothing that stands out actually in the petition, and the Monitor has done a good job at analyzing the differences in the petition. They are actually word for word, almost the same petitions that we've had before. But in this particular one, Museveni has appointed every judge that is on the Supreme Court, unlike previous petitions. This one, every judge of the Supreme Court there has been appointed by Museveni. Some of them actually are people who've defended him in criminal matters and procedures. Did the National Unity Platform make a political calculation away from just the judicial calculation? Did they make a political calculation about this petition?
I think yes and no. I think yes in terms of just simply I love history, so I will approach it from a purely historical perspective. In looking at it, that all these the injustices or the justice, or even just like the murkiness of the judiciary system continues to go on record, while the people on ground have a different experience. So I think that that's an indictment on the judiciary system, but also I think that that's very, very important for like civic education to come for the generations to come, just for them to know like the precedent. Whether when it comes to politically, I think to a large extent, because I think that sometimes media has a tendency to report stories when they are hot and burning. So, for example, there's been like a continuation. If you cover the 2016 election, if you cover 201, 206, you see a clear trend. So election violence goes in, goes out. People are murdered, it's just like it's a scripted thing that they play by, and which of course would be in terms of relevance, in terms of keep people's mind where they need to be. So politically, I think that's the right thing to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't say it's a waste of time for us to. It's actually wishful thinking that a panel of judges that has been appointed by Museveni would go against Museveni. Really, that doesn't make any sense. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. Of course, unless
some people have said, what happened in Nairobi might just happen in Uganda. The Supreme Court sitting might say, let's annul the election.
I think that presupposes that our Supreme Court and our judiciary is as strong as the one in Kenya, but it also presupposes that the very one that we have a similar election, we have a similar presidency, we have a similar, in terms of just how politics run. No, Kenya has actually experienced a change of presidency. I've never seen that even before I was born. So again.
You were not born before the elections were changed.
No.
Yes, if I could end with you. The other thing that Messenger mentioned in the interview, which I felt was really profound, was nonetheless, always file the petition, because there are those small changes which come in with a petition that would never have come in unless someone challenged the outcome of the results. So he says you can fail at the big thing, which is annulling the election, but you can achieve small reforms. In this particular petition, the one thing that really stands out that the Nation Unity Platform wants is to get a permanent restraining order against the army and RDCs from participating in the Ugandan election. Do you think that they will get this ask from the Supreme Court?
I want to steer clear of predicting what the land justices will say. But the important thing is the RDC's office has been very, very controversial. It is, of course, RDCs now actively work for Museveni and the ruling party. When they were put in the 1995 constitution, it was a very contentious matter, but then they just said these are senior civil servants. And so the RDCs, and then the army, I said earlier that the army has now come in to join the police to defend the president against the people, and we have seen that very regularly. If that would happen, that would be a very, very big blow to Museveni is continuing to stay in power, and I see that it will be violated for as long as he will continue to be around.
Thank you so much, Eliasa. Thank you so much, Dismas. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you so much for our viewers who've tuned in to the Fourth Estate. Of course, our job here is to discuss the big stories of the day, the angles which the press has taken, and also discuss how different those stories could have been covered. Thank you so much for joining us this week. See you again next week.